The chow line stretched across the yard at Fort Redstone, boots grinding into the New Mexico dust. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, making tempers short and jokes sharper than usual. Corporal Madison Cross stood in line like everyone else, sleeves rolled just above her wrists. That was all it took. The lotus flower tattoo on her forearm, delicate pink petals spreading across pale skin, caught the attention of a group of infantry soldiers behind her. One of them snorted loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's she gonna do? Meditate the enemy to death?" Laughter erupted, a ripple of mockery at her expense. Madison didn't flinch. She didn't turn around. She just kept her eyes forward, tray steady in her hands, silence her only armor. They thought they knew who she was. They had no idea. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we dive into this powerful story of hidden valor and silent strength, make sure to subscribe so you never miss these untold tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? Let's honor those who served without seeking recognition. Corporal Madison Cross was 29 years old, assigned to IT and cyber operations at Fort Redstone. Her world wasn't firefights or tactical ops. It was computer screens, server logs, and network security reports. While others trained for combat, she kept their communications encrypted and systems online. Every morning she arrived early, blonde hair in a regulation bun, blue eyes sharp behind black-framed glasses. Her uniform was always pressed, boots polished to perfection. She never raised her voice, never complained, never cut corners. If a network went down, Madison fixed it. If classified data needed securing, Madison had already implemented 3 backup protocols. But to combat soldiers, none of that mattered. She wasn't a warrior. She was just another tech specialist sitting in air-conditioned offices. Someone whose quiet presence could be dismissed, whose contributions were invisible until something broke. The men who mocked her were loud, aggressive, convinced worth was measured in calluses and deployment patches. Madison was the opposite, soft-spoken, methodical, humble to the point of invisibility. She didn't brag because she never mentioned past accomplishments. She didn't push back when jokes came. She simply endured with quiet discipline. And then there was the tattoo, a single lotus flower, pink petals in delicate detail, spreading across her right forearm. To most soldiers, it looked completely out of place, feminine, fragile, decorative, everything a soldier supposedly wasn't. In the chow hall, whispers always started. "She get that at some yoga retreat?" Someone would mutter. "What's next? A butterfly tramp stamp?" The laughter never seemed to touch her. Madison never explained it, not once. She kept her sleeves rolled high enough that the ink stayed visible. To her fellow soldiers, it was a punchline. To Madison Cross, it was something sacred she would never cheapen with explanations. The first time it happened in formation, a staff sergeant grabbed her wrist and held it up for everyone to see. "Cross here thinks she's at a spa. What's this supposed to be? Your spirit flower?" Laughter rippled through the ranks. Madison didn't pull away. She just let the silence sit, eyes forward, jaw tight. The sergeant eventually moved on, but the damage was done. She was now fair game. It spread everywhere. 2 specialists at the tech center made bets about whether she could field strip a pistol. In the chow hall, someone bumped her tray deliberately. Metal clattered, food scattered. The hall erupted in jeers. "Nice work, Cross. Real operator material." She knelt, picking up pieces with steady hands. A medic tried to help, but Madison shook her head. She didn't want pity. That became her routine. Alone at meals, alone at her desk, long after hours. The lights in her office burned late, her fingers flying across keyboards. When soldiers passed by, they saw her hunched over monitors, but never wondered what she was actually working on. Yet cracks in her image would show. Little thing, impossible to ignore if someone paid attention. The first clue, a photo in her locker. A female specialist glimpsed it one evening. A group of soldiers in desert camouflage, faces deliberately blurred. Only one detail clear, an EOD unit patch on a sleeve. Before the specialist could study it further, Madison closed the locker, her blue eyes carrying an unspoken warning. The second clue, her tattoo itself. Under harsh LED lights late one night, the lotus revealed more than petals. Thin lines cut through the design, numbers woven into the pattern, coordinates, designations, something precise hidden in plain sight. A visiting EOD sergeant caught sight of it when Madison reached for a cable. His expression changed from casual interest to shocked recognition. He opened his mouth to speak, but when Madison tugged her sleeve down, he simply nodded and left in silence. The third clue, the armory. During weapons inventory, an armorer struggled to identify specialized EOD equipment. Madison's voice cut through before she could stop herself. "That's a fuse puller, ANM2A1 series. Store it climate controlled, not out here." Every head turned. "Cross, how the hell do you know that?" She froze, realizing her mistake. "I read technical manuals, helps with equipment databases." The explanation was weak, and everyone everyone knew it. These weren't accidents. They were fragments of a life buried beneath her persona. The men who mocked her saw only decoration. The few who looked closer saw shadows of something far more dangerous. The inspection came without any warning whatsoever. Late one afternoon, during the middle of a normal work week, word spread rapidly through Fort Redstone that a colonel was making surprise rounds through various facilities, checking readiness and competency across all divisions. Soldiers scrambled to create order out of their usual chaos, straightening equipment, reviewing procedures, making sure everything looked perfect for the visiting brass. Madison Cross stood quietly at her workstation in the tech center, hands resting calmly on her keyboard, already knowing her systems were flawless because they always were. She had nothing to hide when it came to her current job performance. The colonel's polished boots echoed through the hallway as he entered the IT center, his sharp eyes sweeping across the room with military precision. His gaze landed directly on Madison, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. "You," he said, pointing directly at her with his index finger. "Corporal Cross, step forward immediately." The room fell silent except for the quiet humming of computer servers. Madison obeyed without hesitation, her boots clicking smartly against the polished floor as she approached and stood at attention. The colonel studied her for a long moment, his eyes drifting down to the pink lotus tattoo on her forearm before returning to her face. "You're IT, correct?" he asked. "Network security, cyber operations, all that technical stuff?" "Yes, sir," Madison replied, her voice steady and clear. "Then let's see what you really know beyond computers," the colonel said. He turned and gestured toward a training dummy propped in the corner of the room, part of some abandoned first aid course. "Show me how you'd perform a tactical approach to a suspected IED. Talk me through your assessment." A murmur of confusion rippled through the watching IT specialists. This wasn't a fair test at all. Everyone knew Cross was tech support, not combat arms, definitely not EOD. Why was the colonel testing her on something completely outside her job description? But Madison didn't protest the unfair nature of the test. She didn't question the order or point out that this was beyond her duties. She simply looked at the dummy for 3 seconds, then stepped forward with sudden confidence that seemed to come from nowhere. Her entire demeanor shifted in that instant. Her shoulders squared differently. Her movements became deliberate and precise. She circled the dummy slowly, her blue eyes scanning every detail with professional intensity that hadn't been there moments before. "First assessment from this distance," she began, her voice taking on an authoritative tone no one had ever heard from her before. "Approach from upwind if possible to detect any chemical signatures. Visual scan for wires, pressure plates, or disturbed earth indicating buried components." She moved closer, her hands hovering near but never touching the dummy. "Check for anti-handling devices, secondary triggers designed to detonate if the primary device is moved. Look for tripwires at ankle and chest height." She knelt down smoothly, her movements fluid and practiced. "Ground sign analysis. Is the soil disturbed? Are there depressions indicating weight? What's the blast pattern prediction based on placement?" She stood and stepped back. "Once visual assessment is complete, mark a safe cordon at minimum 50 meters, establish entry and exit routes. Then proceed with render-safe procedures using appropriate tools and protocols." She turned to face the colonel. "Time from discovery to render-safe varies depending on device complexity. But standard procedure is never rush, never assume, and never forget that every wire might be the wrong one." The tech center was absolutely silent. Every person in that room stared at Madison Cross as if seeing her for the very first time. The colonel's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes had changed. Respect, perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion he'd been harboring. "That was textbook EOD approach protocol," he said quietly. "Where did you learn that, Corporal?" Madison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment it looked like she might retreat back into her safe silence, might deflect with another weak excuse about reading manuals. But something in the colonel's gaze told her he already knew the truth. "Training, sir," she said simply. "A long time ago." "What kind of training?" the colonel pressed. Madison met his eyes directly. "The kind that teaches you that every flower has thorns, sir." The colonel nodded slowly, understanding the reference immediately, even if no one else did. He glanced down at her lotus tattoo again, and this time his expression softened with something that looked almost like sadness. "At ease, Corporal," he said quietly. "Thank you for the demonstration." As he turned to leave the tech center, he paused at the door and looked back at her one final time. "Some gardens are more dangerous than battlefields," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Never forget what you survived to bloom." Then he was gone, leaving behind a room full of confused IT specialists and one blonde woman whose secret was beginning to crack open whether she wanted it to or not. The convoy arrived at Fort Redstone 3 days later, just after dawn broke across the New Mexico desert. Heavy vehicles rolled through the main gate with deliberate slowness, their tires crunching against gravel, heat already rising from the ground around in shimmering waves. An Army EOD detachment stepped out in perfect formation, disciplined, silent, carrying themselves with the careful awareness of people who had walked toward death more times than they could count. At the front of the formation stood their commander, a weathered lieutenant colonel who had spent 20 years defusing bombs that others were terrified to even look at. Madison Cross stood off to the side near a supply warehouse, tablet in hand, sleeves rolled high as always despite the morning chill. She was taking inventory, counting equipment deliveries, doing the boring logistics work that kept the base running. To everyone watching, she was just another figure in tan fatigues, invisible and unremarkable. She typed notes into her tablet, checked serial numbers against manifests, and kept her head down exactly the way she always did. The EOD commander's gaze swept across the yard with professional thoroughness, sharp and searching for threats, even in this safe environment. And then he froze completely. His eyes locked onto Madison's arm, onto the pink lotus flower tattoo. He stopped walking so abruptly that the operators behind him nearly collided with his back. The entire formation halted, boots falling silent on the concrete. A ripple of confusion moved through the ranks of regular soldiers watching nearby. Why had they stopped? The commander stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing, even though the evidence was right before his eyes. Madison looked up from her tablet, startled, but didn't move away. Her fingers tightened around the device until her knuckles turned white under the pressure. Recognition flashed across her face in rapid succession. Brief terror, then shock, then finally resignation. She knew what was coming next. She'd been dreading this exact moment since the day she arrived at Fort Redstone, hoping to disappear into anonymity. She had run from her past, buried it under computer code and network security protocols, hidden it beneath oversized uniform shirts and deflecting silences. But the past had finally caught up with her. Then, without warning or preamble, the EOD commander straightened his shoulders to perfect military attention and lifted his hand in a crisp, formal salute. The air shifted instantly and dramatically. Soldiers nearby froze mid-task, their tools suspended in mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence, as if someone had hit a mute button on the entire base. Silence spread across the entire yard like a physical wave washing over everything. A whisper slipped through watching ranks, confused and uncertain. Why is he saluting an IT specialist? But the question went unanswered because no one dared laugh now. No one dared make a sound. The atmosphere had transformed in seconds from casual morning routine to something heavy, sacred, weighted with unspoken significance that everyone could feel but few could understand. The commander's voice carried low but firm. "Still carrying those petals, Cross?" Madison's throat worked. She gave the smallest nod. "Every single one, sir." And just like that, the truth cracked open. Madison Cross was no ordinary IT specialist. Years earlier, she had served as one of the most decorated EOD specialists in recent military history. Her call sign was never spoken in official reports. Her missions were never publicized. That pink lotus tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a memorial. Each petal represented a life saved during a render-safe operation. 47 petals. 47 times she had knelt beside a bomb while others evacuated. 47 times she had chosen the right wire, the right tool, the right moment. The lotus symbol had been chosen deliberately, a flower that grows in muddy water but blooms clean, representing rebirth from darkness. The commander standing before her had been one of those 47. 5 years ago in Afghanistan, during an operation that officially never happened, Madison had rendered safe an IED complex that had pinned down his entire unit for hours under the brutal sun. She had worked for 3 hours in 100-degree heat while under sporadic sniper fire, her hands steady despite the circumstances, her voice calm over the radio talking others through secondary device locations. She had to make decisions that could mean the difference between walking away and being carried away. Each wire she touched, each tool she selected, each breath she took was calculated with the knowledge that one mistake would end multiple lives. When it was finally over, when the last device had been rendered safe, 19 EOD specialists and infantry soldiers had walked away alive. The commander had sworn then, covered in dust and gratitude, that he would never forget her face or that lotus tattoo. And now, standing in the New Mexico sun at Fort Redstone, he held that salute, unmoving, as Madison slowly set down her tablet and returned it with the same quiet precision she brought to everything in her life. For the first time since she had arrived at this base, every mocking voice fell completely silent. The salute hung in the air, heavy with memory. Then the EOD commander lowered his hand and turned to address the gathered soldiers. "You think she's just an IT tech?" he asked. "You think that tattoo is some kind of joke?" No one answered. No one dared. The commander's gaze swept the formation, making eye contact with several who had mocked Madison at meals. Years ago, ago, he began, his voice carrying the weight of testimony, in a valley most of you will never hear the name of, my entire unit was pinned down by a complex IED network. We were trapped for 6 hours. No way forward, no way back. One wrong step meant losing legs or lives. Temperature was over 100 degrees. We were running out of water, running out of hope, and then she showed up. He pointed at Madison, who stood frozen, arms wrapped around her tablet like armor. She looked trapped between humility and dread, wanting desperately to disappear. She wasn't just on the ground with us, the commander continued, his voice thick with emotion now. She was the only one willing to approach those devices. 3 separate IEDs, all wired together in a network designed to kill whoever tried to disarm them, all connected to pressure plates we couldn't see buried in the sand. She spent 3 hours on her knees in the dirt under that brutal sun, talking herself through each cut, each decision. We could hear her breathing over the radio, quick at first, then forced into calm. We could hear her hands shaking when she keyed the mic to update us on what she was finding, but she never stopped working. She never ran, even though she had every reason to. His voice grew quieter but more powerful. Every person in my unit, 19 soldiers, walked out of that valley alive because of her. Because she chose to walk toward what everyone else ran from. Because she was willing to be the last person standing between a bomb and the people behind her. Because she had skills most of us will never have, and courage most of us will never need to find. That tattoo you all laughed at? Each petal is a life. 47 lives. 47 times she knelt down and said, "Not today." 47 families who don't know her name but have someone at their dinner table because of her hands. A deeper hush fell over the yard. Soldiers who had mocked her lotus tattoo shifted uncomfortably, shame written across their faces. Specialists who had joked about her not handling weapons stared at the ground. The commander stepped back toward Madison. He raised his hand again in that crisp salute. This time, the gesture wasn't his alone. One by one, every EOD operator behind him followed suit. Then regular army officers. Then enlisted soldiers who had once laughed. Boots snapped together across the yard. Hands rose to brows in perfect unison. The air became electric with respect. Madison's throat tightened visibly. She didn't smile. She didn't break down. She returned the salute with quiet steadiness that made the moment even more powerful. For a long moment, hardened veterans saluted the woman they had dismissed. The pink lotus ink that had been Mockery's target was now revealed as a banner of courage and sacrifice. It was the kind of moment no one on Fort Redstone would ever forget. The kind that changed how people saw not just Madison Cross, but how they evaluated everyone around them. When the salute finally ended, the yard remained silent for several seconds. No one spoke. No one dared move, as if breaking the spell would be disrespectful. The EOD commander slowly lowered his hand, his expression softening from military bearing to something personal. "You've earned more than silence, Cross," he said quietly. "These soldiers should know exactly who stands among them every day." Madison shook her head gently. "I'm just doing my job, sir, same as everyone else." The commander studied her face. "Still hiding," he observed, not unkindly. "Some habits are hard to break, I suppose. Some secrets are easier to carry than the alternative," Madison replied softly. And that was the end of it. No grand speech from her. No demand for recognition or apologies. No dramatic revelations about specific missions. Just the same quiet discipline she had always shown, even now when she had every right to defend herself against months of mockery. The EOD detachment moved on to their training exercises. Regular soldiers slowly returned to their duties, but everything felt different. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. From that day forward, no one mocked Madison Cross. No one made jokes about her pink lotus tattoo. The men and women who had laughed now stood a little straighter when she walked past, their voices quieter, their eyes carrying respect instead of dismissal. In the days and weeks that followed, stories began to spread throughout Fort Redstone like wildfire through dry grass. Whispers of what she had actually done during her EOD career traveled from one soldier to another in chow lines and barracks, growing in detail and reverence with each retelling. Someone found old news articles buried online about unnamed EOD specialists who had received classified commendations for actions that could never be made public. Someone else claimed to have served with someone who knew someone from her old unit, someone who had been there in that valley and had watched her work with hands that refused to shake even when death was one wrong wire away. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core truth remained constant and unshakable. Madison Cross had saved dozens of lives over her career, had walked toward death repeatedly when others were running the opposite direction, had earned every single petal on that lotus flower through blood and sweat and steady hands that made impossible choices in impossible situations. She never confirmed the stories that circulated about her. She never corrected the exaggerations that inevitably crept in or filled in the gaps that people were desperate to know. She didn't need to anymore. The truth had spoken for itself in that moment of salute, and nothing she could say would add to or detract from it. Madison Cross became a quiet legend at Fort Redstone, not because she sought recognition or fame or wanted her story told, but because respect had finally found her, despite her best and most determined efforts to remain invisible and forgotten. The pink lotus continued to bloom on her forearm, visible every single day when she rolled up her sleeve. But now, when soldiers saw it as they passed her in hallways or sat near her in the chow hall, they saw something completely and fundamentally different than before. Not weakness or feminine decoration or something to mock, but a garden grown from survival and sacrifice. 47 lives saved. 47 reasons why silence had been her shield for so long. 47 families who would never know her name, but whose loved ones came home because of her. Some warriors carry their medals proudly on their chests for the world to see. Some carry their scars on their skin, where they can be counted and measured. And some, like Madison Cross, carry their victories in ink that only the worthy ever truly understand. Silent testaments to battles fought in shadows, to lives saved without fanfare, to courage that asks for nothing in return but the satisfaction of a job done right. True strength isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes the quietest warrior in the room carries the deepest scars and the highest honors. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks and dismisses is the one who has already proven their worth in ways most people will never have to face, in situations most people couldn't survive, with stakes most people can't imagine. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest tribute to what they've survived, what they've seen, what they've done when everything hung in the balance and failure wasn't an option. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about the silent soldiers around you, if it reminded you that heroes don't always announce themselves, then subscribe to Secrets Never Told. Because the greatest heroes are often the ones no one sees coming, the ones who serve without seeking glory or recognition, the ones who save lives and then go back to their desks as if nothing extraordinary happened. They're the ones who wear their courage quietly, who carry their battles internally, who ask for nothing but the chance to serve. Until next time, remember, never judge a warrior by their silence. Sometimes silence is earned through sacrifice. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who has already faced down death and chose to keep walking forward. Honor them not with noise, but with respect, with understanding, and with the recognition that strength comes in many forms. Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.